Picture the opulent Riviera Express speeding through the French night, its elegant passengers cloaked in secrets. A scream pierces the silence. Lady Eleanor Whitfield lies dead, a jewelled dagger in her heart, her suite locked from within. Hercule Poirot, the master of deduction, unravels a web of betrayal, greed, and revenge. A financier with a hidden scandal, an opera singer with a vengeful past, a chemist with a deadly secret, each a suspect, each with a motive, a missing wine bottle, a planted earring, a tampered lock, clues that lead to a chilling truth. In this locked room mystery, only Poirot's little grey cells can reveal the murderer before the train reaches Nice. Will justice prevail, or will the killer escape into the Riviera's sunlit shadows? Chapter 1. The Departure from Paris. The platform at Gare de Lyon shimmered with the frenetic elegance of a Parisian morning, the air thick with the scent of coal smoke and anticipation. Hercule Poirot stood poised, his small, immaculate figure a study in precision, from the mirror-like polish of his patent leather shoes to the meticulous symmetry of his waxed moustache. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings fidgeted, his good-natured face betraying a mild impatience with the bustle around them. The Riviera Express, its navy blue carriages gleaming like sapphires under the pale September sun, stood ready to whisk its passengers to the sun-drenched coast of Nice. The train's whistle, sharp and imperious, cut through the clamour of porters and the murmured farewells of travellers. Poirot's grey eyes, keen as a falcon's, swept over the scene, noting the smallest details, the way a young woman in a fur-trimmed coat clutched her handbag too tightly, the hurried stride of a man in a pinstriped suit as he boarded, the faint tremor in a porter's hand as he lifted a heavy valise. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low but resonant with curiosity, "how each passenger carries not only luggage but secrets. The Riviera Express is no mere train. It is a stage, and we are about to witness a drama." Hastings, adjusting his trilby against the morning chill, chuckled. "You see mysteries everywhere, old chap. These are just wealthy folk off for a bit of sun and sea. Nothing more sinister than a sunburn, I'd wager." Poirot's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "The human heart, mon ami, does not board a train without its shadows. Even in the pursuit of pleasure, there is motive, there is intent, and where there is intent, there is the possibility of crime." The passengers assembling on the platform were a microcosm of wealth and influence, each a distinct thread in the tapestry Poirot's mind was already weaving. There was Lady Eleanor Whitfield, a British aristocrat of middle years, her auburn hair swept beneath a stylish cloche hat, her eyes flashing with the confidence of one accustomed to command. Her reputation for sharp wit and sharper scandals preceded her, whispered in London, drawing rooms and Parisian salons alike. Nearby stood Monsieur Claude Dubois, a French financier, his lean frame cloaked in a tailored overcoat, his expression guarded as he glanced at his pocket watch. Miss Sophia Castellano, an Italian opera singer, drew every eye with her raven hair and luminous beauty, her laugh like a melody as she chatted with a porter. Dr. Heinrich Vogel, a German chemist, clutched a locked leather briefcase, his pale face set in a mask of preoccupation. And then there was Mr. James Carver, an American businessman whose booming voice carried across the platform, his broad gestures contrasting with the quiet, almost invisible presence of his secretary, Miss Laura Trent, who followed him with a notepad in hand. The final call for boarding sounded, and Poirot and Hastings made their way to their first-class compartment, a haven of polished wood and plush velvet. As they settled in, Poirot's attention lingered on the other passengers filing past their window. Lady Whitfield's emerald brooch caught the light, a detail Poirot noted with interest. Dubois' fingers twitched as he adjusted his cufflinks, a nervous habit. Miss Castellano's silk scarf fluttered as she laughed. while Dr. Vogel's briefcase never left his side, even as he maneuvered through the narrow corridor. Carver's loud complaints about the size of his suite echoed, while Miss Trent's eyes darted nervously, as if expecting reprimand. The train jolted forward, and Paris began to slip away, its spires giving way to the rolling countryside. Poirot leaned back, his hands folded neatly over his waistcoat. "This journey, Hastings," he said softly, "will be most illuminating. The Riviera Express carries more than passengers. It carries destinies. And I, Hercule Poirot, shall be watching." Hastings, already reaching for a newspaper, shook his head with a grin. "You're incorrigible, Poirot. Let's just enjoy the ride, shall we?" But Poirot's eyes remained fixed on the corridor beyond their compartment, where the shadows of the passengers moved like players in a yet unwritten play. The little grey cells, as he called them, were already at work, sensing the undercurrent of tension that would soon unravel into tragedy. Chapter 2. The First Night. The Riviera Express glided through the French countryside, its rhythm a soothing counterpoint to the vibrant hum of the dining car, where the elite of the train's passengers gathered under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. The carriage was a symphony of elegance, tables draped in pristine linen, silver cutlery gleaming, and the faint clink of fine glassware mingling with the murmur of cultured voices. Hercule Poirot, seated alone at a small table near the centre, savoured his consommé, his sharp grey eyes moving methodically over the scene. Each passenger in their finery was a study in character, their gestures and glances revealing fragments of the puzzle that was human, nature. To his left, Lady Eleanor Whitfield held court, her auburn hair catching the light as she leaned toward Mr. James Carver, the American businessman, her voice sharp with indignation. "You assured me, Mr. Carver," she said, her tone cutting through the ambient chatter, "that the investment was secure, yet my solicitors inform me of significant losses. Explain yourself." Carver, his broad face flushed, waved a dismissive hand, his gold cufflinks glinting. "Now, Lady Whitfield, these things take time. Markets fluctuate. You can't expect instant returns." His voice, loud and confident, carried the brash assurance of a man accustomed to bending others to his will. Beside him, Miss Laura Trent, his secretary, sat quietly, her pale hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on her untouched plate as if willing herself invisible. At a nearby table, Monsieur Claude Dubois dined alone, his lean frame hunched slightly over a glass of Bordeaux, his gaze distant yet intense, as though wrestling with thoughts he dared not share. Poirot noted the faint tremor in his fingers as he lifted the glass, a detail that spoke of unease beneath his polished exterior. Across the car, Miss Sophia Castellano, the Italian opera singer, drew admiring glances, her laughter a melodic cascade as she conversed with a young waiter. Her emerald green gown shimmered, and her dark eyes sparkled with a vitality that seemed to illuminate the room. Dr. Heinrich Vogel, the German chemist, was conspicuously absent, having sent word through the steward that he was indisposed, preferring to rest in his compartment. Poirot sipped his wine, his mind cataloguing these observations. "The dining car, mon ami," he had remarked to Captain Hastings earlier, "is where the masks of civility are worn most thinly. One must watch closely, for it is here that truths are inadvertently revealed." Hastings, now seated at the bar with a whisky, had merely chuckled, accustomed to Poirot's penchant for seeing intrigue in the mundane. As the meal progressed, Poirot's attention was drawn to a subtle exchange. Lady Whitfield, her argument with Carver unresolved, rose abruptly, her silk shawl slipping to the floor. Miss Trent, ever dutiful, retrieved it, but as she did, Poirot caught a fleeting look of resentment in her eyes, quickly masked by her usual deference. Carver, oblivious, continued his loud discourse, now addressing a nearby passenger about the virtues of American industry. Dubois, meanwhile, excused himself early, his departure marked by a curt nod to the steward, his wine-glass barely touched. The dining car began to empty as passengers retired to their compartments, or lingered in the lounge car for liqueurs and conversation. Poirot, preferring the quiet of observation, remained until the last course was cleared, then took a leisurely stroll through the train's corridors. The Riviera Express was a marvel of engineering and luxury, its first-class carriages divided into two distinct sections, single compartments where Poirot and Hastings were housed, and larger suites occupied by Lady Whitfield, Carver, and Dubois. Miss Castellano and Miss Trent shared a double compartment, its door adorned with a small brass plaque. Dr. Vogel's single compartment, near the end of the carriage, was marked by its closed curtains, a sign of his self-imposed seclusion. The corridors were narrow, the polished wood walls reflecting the soft light of sconces. Poirot paused outside Lady Whitfield's suite, noting the heavy bolt on her door, a feature unique to the suites for added privacy. He continued, his steps silent on the thick carpet, until he reached the junction where the first-class carriages met the dining car. Here, the conductor, Monsieur Renaud, stood at his post, his uniform crisp, his demeanour attentive yet weary. Poirot engaged him in brief conversation, learning that Renaud had served on the Riviera Express for a decade, his master key a constant companion, shared only with the train's engineer. As Poirot returned to his compartment, the train's gentle sway lulled the passengers into a false sense of security. He settled into his seat, his mind replaying the evening's observations. Lady Whitfield's sharp words, Carver's bluster, Dubois' reticence, Miss Castellano's charm, Miss Trent's quiet tension, and Dr. Vogel's absence. Each was a piece of a puzzle, though the picture remained elusive. At precisely midnight, the tranquillity shattered. A piercing scream tore through the carriage, high and desperate, followed by a heavy silence. Poirot, instantly alert, slipped on his dressing gown and stepped into the corridor, where Hastings, bleary-eyed but hastening, joined him. "Good heavens, Poirot! What was that?" Hastings asked, his voice thick with sleep. "The sound of tragedy, mon ami," Poirot replied, his tone grave. "Quickly, we must find its source." The scream had come from the direction of Lady Whitfield's suite. Other passengers emerged, their faces pale in the dim light. Miss Castellano, her hair loose and her eyes wide. Dubois, his overcoat thrown hastily over his pyjamas, and Carver, cursing under his breath. Miss Trent appeared moments later, her hands trembling as she clutched her shawl. Dr. Vogel, however, remained absent. Monsieur Renaud, summoned by the commotion, arrived with his master key, his face ashen. "It is Lady Whitfield's suite," he said, his voice unsteady. He fumbled with the key, unlocking the heavy door with a click that echoed in the tense silence. The door swung open, revealing a scene of horror. Lady Eleanor Whitfield sat slumped in an armchair, her head tilted back, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. A jewelled dagger, its handle encrusted with sapphires, protruded from her chest, the blade buried deep. Her evening gown, a rich burgundy, was marred by a spreading stain of crimson, stark against the pale silk of her shawl. The room was otherwise undisturbed, the bed untouched, the curtains drawn, the window locked tight. A single lamp cast a warm glow, mocking the cold reality of death. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, stepping forward, his eyes scanning the scene with clinical precision. He noted the position of the body, the angle of the dagger, the absence of any struggle. The door's bolt, now disengaged by Renaud's key, showed no signs of forced entry. The air held a faint scent of perfume, mingled with something metallic. Blood. Hastings, standing at the threshold, paled. Good Lord, Poirot. She's been murdered. Right here, on the train. Oui, Hastings, Poirot said, his voice calm but laced with intensity. And in a locked room, no less. This is no ordinary crime. The Riviera Express has become a stage for murder, and we must uncover the director of this grim play. Renaud, trembling, assured Poirot that the door had been bolted from the inside, accessible only by his key or the engineer's. I checked the carriage myself at 11, he said. All was in order. Lady Whitfield was alive. She spoke to me about the temperature in her suite. Poirot nodded, his mind already turning. He approached the body, careful not to disturb the scene. The dagger was exquisite, likely part of Lady Whitfield's own collection, its craftsmanship suggesting both wealth and sentiment. Her hands lay limp, one clutching a fold of her shawl, the other resting on the armrest. A single drop of blood had fallen onto the carpet, its edges already drying. Observe, Hastings, Poirot said, pointing to the dagger. The strike is precise, directly to the heart. This was no act of passion, but one of calculation. Yet the locked door, c'est curieux. We must consider how such a thing was accomplished. Miss Castellano, hovering near the doorway, stifled a sob. She was so alive, so vibrant. Only hours ago, she said, her voice breaking. We spoke in the corridor after dinner, about her travels. She seemed troubled, but I thought it was merely fatigue. Dubois, his face impassive, said nothing, though his eyes flickered toward the dagger. Carver, pushing forward, demanded, Who could have done this? We're all trapped on this blasted train. Miss Trent, silent, seemed to shrink further into herself, her gaze fixed on the floor. Poirot turned to Renaud. Monsieur, you will secure this suite and ensure no one enters until the authorities are summoned. The train must stop at the next station. I, Hercule Poirot, will assist in this matter, for the truth must be found. Renaud nodded, dispatching a porter to alert the engineer. The passengers were ushered back to their compartments, their whispers filling the corridor with unease. Poirot lingered a moment longer, his eyes sweeping the room once more. A faint glint caught his attention, a broken wine glass, its fragments scattered near the armchair, its contents staining the carpet with a faint, dark pool. He bent to examine it, noting a subtle odour, not of wine, but something sharper, chemical. Hastings, Poirot said, straightening. This is no simple murder. There are layers here, like the folds of a fan. We must unfold them carefully. As the train slowed, preparing to halt at a small station near Dijon, Poirot's mind was already at work, the little grey cells piecing together the fragments of a crime that defied the ordinary. The first night on the Riviera Express had ended in bloodshed, and the journey, he knew, was far from over. Chapter 3. The investigation begins. The Riviera Express stood motionless at a quiet station near Dijon, its gleaming carriages incongruous against the backdrop of a sleepy provincial platform. The morning light filtered through a thin mist, casting a pall over the scene as local police boarded the train, their heavy footsteps echoing in the corridor. Hercule Poirot, his demeanour as composed as ever, stood outside Lady Eleanor Whitfield's suite, his sharp eyes noting the arrival of Inspector Lefebvre, a wiry man with a pinched face and a reputation for efficiency. Captain Hastings, at Poirot's side, shifted uncomfortably, the gravity of the previous night's events weighing heavily on him. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Lefebvre said, extending a hand, your reputation precedes you. The conductor speaks highly of your abilities. We would be grateful for your assistance in this matter, provided you respect our authority. Poirot inclined his head, his moustache twitching slightly. Naturellement, Inspector's system. Inspector, I, Hercule Poirot, am honoured to assist. My methods are those of observation and deduction, and I shall respect your authority while seeking the truth. Lefebvre nodded, satisfied, and led the way into Lady Whitfield's suite, where the scene remained untouched, preserved as Poirot had insisted. The body of Lady Whitfield still sat in the armchair, the jewelled dagger a stark intrusion in the otherwise elegant room. The air was heavy with the faint metallic tang of blood, now mingled with the musty scent of a closed compartment. Poirot's gaze swept over the scene with clinical precision, noting details that the untrained eye might overlook. The dagger, embedded in Lady Whitfield's chest, was indeed from her own collection. Poirot had confirmed this with the conductor, who recalled her displaying it proudly during a previous journey. The wound was clean, a single thrust to the heart, suggesting a steady hand and deliberate intent. The window, a narrow panel of reinforced glass, was locked from the inside, its latch intact. The door's heavy bolt, disengaged by Renault's master key the previous night, showed no obvious signs of damage. Poirot knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene, and examined the dagger closely. Its sapphire-encrusted handle gleamed under the lamplight, but the blade was unremarkable, sharp and functional. He noted the absence of defensive wounds on Lady Whitfield's hands, suggesting she had not resisted. A faint bruise on her wrist, barely visible, caught his attention, a detail to be explored later. The broken wine glass, its fragments scattered near the armchair, drew his scrutiny once more. The stain on the carpet had dried, but the chemical odour he had detected lingered, faint but unmistakable. "Inspector," Poirot said, rising, "the precision of the wound and the locked door suggest a crime of calculation, not passion. We must determine how the murderer entered and exited without disturbing the bolt." Lefebvre frowned, his fingers tapping his notebook. "The conductor insists only he and the engineer have master keys. If the door was bolted from within, how could anyone gain entry?" "Précisément," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "That is the question that occupies the little grey cells." Hastings, hovering near the doorway, interjected, "It's impossible, Poirot. A locked room, a bolted door, unless the murderer is a ghost." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "There are no ghosts, mon ami. Only facts waiting to be arranged in their proper order." With the inspector's permission, Poirot began questioning the passengers, assembling them in the lounge car, a spacious compartment adorned with velvet upholstery and mahogany panelling. The atmosphere was tense, the passengers' faces etched with unease, their finery now seeming out of place in the shadow of death. Poirot stood at the head of the room, his small stature commanding attention, his voice measured and authoritative. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "a tragedy has occurred, and it is my duty, alongside Inspector Lefebvre, to uncover the truth. Each of you will account for your movements last night. Speak plainly, for deception will only delay justice." Mr. James Carver, his broad frame filling a plush armchair, spoke first, his voice gruff. "I argued with Lady Whitfield in the dining car. Everyone heard it. She was furious about a deal that went sour, claimed I'd misled her. But I left her alive and well after dinner, around 10 o'clock, and went to the lounge for a cigar. Ask anyone there." Monsieur Claude Dubois, his lean face composed but his eyes wary, said, "I dined alone and retired to my compartment by 10:30. I heard nothing unusual. My suite is 2 doors from Lady Whitfield's, but the walls are thick, and I was absorbed in my papers. Miss Sophia Castellano, her beauty undimmed despite her pallor, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. I saw Eleanor, Lady Whitfield, in the corridor at 11. We spoke briefly about her plans in Nice. She seemed distracted, perhaps angry, but I thought little of it. I was in my compartment with Miss Trent by 11:30, preparing for bed. Miss Laura Trent, her voice barely above a whisper, confirmed this. I was with Miss Castellano reading. I heard no scream, no disturbance. Our compartment is across the corridor from Lady Whitfield's. Dr. Heinrich Vogel, his locked briefcase at his feet, spoke tersely. I was unwell and remained in my compartment all evening. I slept deeply and heard nothing. My door was locked, my curtains drawn. Poirot noted each response, his mind cataloguing inconsistencies. Carver's bluster carried a hint of defensiveness. Dubois' reticence suggested concealment. Miss Castellano's tears seemed genuine but rehearsed. Miss Trent's timidity bordered on evasion, and Vogel's absence from the dining car was convenient, yet none admitted to hearing the scream, save those in adjacent compartments, and none could explain the locked door. After dismissing the passengers, Poirot returned to the suite, accompanied by Inspector Lefebvre and Hastings. He examined the door's bolt, noting faint scratches near the keyhole, subtle enough to escape casual notice. "These marks," he said, "suggest tampering, perhaps with a tool or a duplicate key. We must ascertain who had access to Monsieur Renaud's key." Renaud, summoned again, was adamant. "My key never leaves my person, except when I place it in the conductor's office during brief breaks. Last night, I stepped away for perhaps 10 minutes to assist a passenger in the second-class carriage. The office was locked, but I cannot swear it was untouched." Poirot's eyes narrowed. 10 minutes, monsieur, is ample time for one with skill and purpose." He then inspected the wineglass fragments, collecting a sample of the dried residue for analysis. The chemical odour, faint but persistent, hinted at something beyond mere wine. "Inspector, this must be tested. I suspect a substance that dulled Lady Whitfield's senses, ensuring she could not resist her attacker." Lefebvre agreed, dispatching an officer to a local laboratory. Poirot's attention turned to the room's other contents. A small writing desk, its papers neatly arranged, revealed nothing incriminating at first glance. A velvet jewellery box, however, was open, its contents intact save for a missing pearl earring, the mate to which Poirot had found in Lady Whitfield's shawl. He held it up, its lustre catching the light. "This earring," he said, "does not belong to Lady Whitfield. Her pair, still in the box, is of sapphire. This is a clue, or a deception." Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, shook his head. "It's a puzzle, Poirot. The scratches, the earring, the locked door. How do they fit together?" "They will, Hastings," Poirot replied, his voice calm but resolute. "The little grey cells are assembling the pieces. We must now explore the passenger's belongings, for therein may lie the thread that unravels this mystery." With the inspector's approval, Poirot arranged to inspect the passenger's luggage, a task to be conducted with discretion to avoid further unrest. The train, still halted, buzzed with the tension of a caged menagerie, its passengers aware that a murderer walked among them. Poirot, undeterred, prepared for the next phase of his investigation, knowing that the truth, like the Riviera Express itself, was merely waiting to be set in motion. Chapter 4. The Clues Emerge. The Riviera Express remained stationary at the small station near Dijon, its opulent carriages an incongruous sight against the rustic platform, now bustling with police officers and curious onlookers. Inside, the atmosphere was taut, the passengers confined to their compartments under Inspector Lefebvre's orders, their unease palpable. Hercule Poirot, his demeanour unruffled, stood in Lady Eleanor Whitfield's suite, his sharp grey eyes methodically revisiting the scene of the crime. Captain Hastings hovered nearby, his brow furrowed, struggling to keep pace with Poirot's relentless scrutiny. The morning light streamed through the locked window, illuminating the grim tableau. Lady Whitfield's body, now covered with a sheet at the inspector's insistence, remained in the armchair, the jewelled dagger removed for forensic examination. Poirot's attention, however, was drawn to the smaller details that lingered in the room, each a potential key to unlocking the mystery of the locked suite. He knelt beside the armchair, his gloved fingers probing the folds of the velvet upholstery. There, Half concealed beneath a cushion, he found a crumpled note, its edges frayed as though hastily torn. Written in French in a looping, unfamiliar hand, it read, "Vous payerez pour votre trahison." You will pay for your betrayal. Poirot held the note aloft, his eyes narrowing. This, Hastings, is a message of intent, but whether it is genuine or a diversion, we shall see. The handwriting must be compared to that of our passengers. Hastings peered at the note, his expression skeptical. It's rather dramatic, don't you think? Sounds like something from one of those novels Miss Trent was reading. Perhaps, Poirot replied, tucking the note into an envelope for safekeeping. But drama, mon ami, is often the cloak of truth. His gaze returned to the broken wineglass near the armchair, its fragments scattered across the carpet. The dark stain, now fully dried, retained that faint chemical odour Poirot had noted earlier. He collected another sample, sealing it carefully for the laboratory, convinced it held a vital clue. Nearby, the pearl earring, its mate missing from Lady Whitfield's jewellery box, lay in his pocket, a silent accusation against an unknown owner. Poirot's mind turned to the possibility that it had been deliberately placed, a subtle misdirection, to implicate another. Leaving the suite, Poirot requested Inspector Lefebvre's permission to examine the door's bolt more closely. The faint scratches he had observed the previous night were clearer in daylight, delicate but unmistakable, suggesting the use of a fine tool or an improvised key. These marks, Poirot said to Lefebvre, indicate that the lock was manipulated, perhaps with a duplicate key fashioned during Monsieur Renault's brief absence. We must discover who had the opportunity to access his master key. Lefebvre, scribbling in his notebook, nodded. Renault claims he left the key in the conductor's office for only 10 minutes. But a skilled individual could have acted swiftly. Précisément, Poirot agreed. And skill, Inspector, is a quality we must seek among our passengers. With the inspector's approval, Poirot and Hastings began a discreet inspection of the passengers' luggage, conducted in the lounge car to maintain order. The passengers, summoned one by one, complied with varying degrees of reluctance, their expressions ranging from indignation to nervous compliance. Poirot, ever courteous, explained the necessity of the search, his tone soothing yet firm. First was Mr. James Carver, whose suitcase revealed a collection of business contracts, one of which bore Lady Whitfield's signature. The document outlined a joint venture in a Mediterranean shipping company, with a clause indicating significant financial penalties for Carver should the deal collapse. She was going to pull out, Carver admitted, his face reddening. Said I'd misrepresented the risks, but I didn't kill her over it, if that's what you're thinking. Poirot's smile was inscrutable. I think only what the evidence permits, monsieur. Monsieur Claude Dubois' belongings were sparse, his leather satchel containing financial ledgers and a few personal letters. One letter, written in French, hinted at a dispute with an unnamed party over a loan, but the handwriting did not match the crumpled note. Dubois' composure faltered briefly as Poirot examined the letters, his fingers twitching as though eager to reclaim them. These are private matters, he said curtly. They have no bearing on Lady Whitfield's death. We shall see, Poirot replied, his tone neutral. Miss Sophia Castellano's luggage was a treasure trove of theatricality. Silk gowns, sheet music, and a script for an opera titled La Tradita, a tale of a betrayed lover seeking revenge. The script's margins were filled with fervent annotations in Italian, some underlined with passion. It is my next role, Miss Castellano explained, her voice trembling. Eleanor admired my work. She even promised to attend my performance in Nice. Poirot nodded, noting the script's theme of betrayal, a curious parallel to the note. And this script, mademoiselle, was it ever out of your possession? Never, she insisted, though her eyes darted briefly to the side. Miss Laura Trent's bag contained little of note. A novel, a few toiletries, and a small notebook with shorthand entries, mostly schedules for Carver's appointments. Her hands trembled as Poirot leafed through the notebook, and she murmured, "It's just my work, nothing important." Dr. Heinrich Vogel, the last to be searched, was visibly reluctant to open his locked briefcase. After a tense exchange with Inspector Lefebvre, he relented, revealing a collection of scientific papers and chemical formulas, meticulously organized. One document outlined a formula for a sedative compound, its properties described in precise German script. "My research," Vogel said, his voice clipped. "It is proprietary and unrelated to this tragedy." Poirot's eyes lingered on the formula, his mind connecting it to the chemical odour in the wineglass. "Your work, Doctor, is most interesting. We shall discuss it further." As the searches concluded, Poirot and Hastings returned to the lounge car, where Inspector Lefebvre awaited their findings. Poirot summarized the discoveries: the note, the earring, the scratched lock, and the suspicious items in the passenger's luggage. "Each clue," he said, "is a thread in a tapestry. The note suggests motive, the earring suggests misdirection, the lock suggests method. But the wineglass, that is the key. If it contains a sedative, as I suspect, it tells us Lady Whitfield was incapacitated before the fatal blow." Lefebvre, impressed but cautious, agreed to expedite the laboratory analysis of the wineglass residue. "If you're right, Monsieur Poirot, this changes everything. A drugged victim in a locked room. How was it done?" "That," Poirot said, tapping his temple, "is what the little grey cells are working to uncover. We must now consider the passenger's opportunities. Who could have accessed the wine, tampered with the lock, and placed the earring?" Hastings, pacing, shook his head. "It's maddening, Poirot. Carver had a motive. Dubois is hiding something. Miss Castellano's script is suspicious. Miss Trent seems terrified. And Vogel's briefcase is practically a chemist's laboratory. But the locked door, how?" "The door, Hastings, is not the mystery," Poirot said, his voice soft but resolute. "It is the mind behind the door that we must unlock. Someone on this train planned this crime with precision, and they have left clues, whether by intent or error. We shall find them." As the afternoon waned, the passengers remained under scrutiny, their movements restricted to the first-class carriages. Poirot, sensing the web of deception tightening, prepared for the next phase of his investigation. The crumpled note, the pearl earring, the scratched lock, and the chemical-laden wineglass were pieces of a puzzle that, once assembled, would reveal the murderer's face. The Riviera Express, though halted, was alive with secrets, and Poirot's little grey cells were relentless in their pursuit of the truth. Chapter 5. Motives and Alibis. The Riviera Express, still halted at the small station near Dijon, seemed to hold its breath under the weight of suspicion. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the platform, where police officers maintained a cordon, their presence a stark reminder of the tragedy within. Inside the lounge car, the passengers sat in uneasy silence, their earlier elegance marred by the strain of confinement and scrutiny. Hercule Poirot, standing at the head of the room, exuded an air of calm authority, his impeccable suit and polished shoes a contrast to the disquiet around him. Captain Hastings, seated near the bar, fidgeted with his cufflinks, his usual optimism tempered by the grim reality of murder. Inspector Lefebvre, his notebook open, stood beside Poirot, his pinched face betraying a mix of deference and impatience. The laboratory analysis of the wineglass residue was still pending, but Poirot, undeterred, had requested a formal gathering to probe deeper into the passengers' motives and alibis. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and measured. "The death of Lady Eleanor Whitfield was no accident, but a crime of deliberate intent. Each of you, I have observed, had reason to bear her ill will. Let us speak plainly, for the truth cannot hide forever. The passengers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Poirot and one another. Mr. James Carver, his broad frame filling a velvet-upholstered chair, was the first to break the silence. "All right, Poirot, you want plain speaking. Lady Whitfield was bleeding me dry. That shipping deal we signed, she was set to pull out, leaving me with nothing but debts. I told her as much in the dining car, loud and clear. But I didn't kill her. I was in the lounge until 11, smoking with that Italian fellow who runs the bar. Check with him." Poirot's gaze was steady. "Your financial distress, Monsieur Carver, is noted. But distress alone does not a murderer make. We shall verify your alibi." Monsieur Claude Dubois, his lean face pale but composed, spoke next, his voice low and precise. "Lady Whitfield and I had a disagreement, yes. She threatened to expose certain financial arrangements of mine, ones that might have been misunderstood. I retired to my suite after dinner, as I said, and saw nothing, heard nothing. My papers kept me occupied until well past midnight." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And these arrangements, Monsieur Dubois, were they of such a nature that exposure would ruin you?" Dubois's lips tightened. "They were private, Monsieur Poirot. That is all you need know." Miss Sophia Castellano, her dark eyes glistening with unshed tears, clutched her lace handkerchief. "Eleanor and I were not enemies, despite what you might think. Years ago, in Rome, I was involved with her late husband. It ended badly, and she humiliated me publicly, calling me a fortune hunter. But that was long past. We spoke cordially last night, and I harboured no grudge. I was in my compartment with Miss Trent, as she told you." Poirot's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "And yet, mademoiselle, your opera script speaks of betrayal and revenge. A coincidence, perhaps, but one that bears scrutiny. Miss Laura Trent, her hands twisting in her lap, spoke so softly that the room strained to hear. I had no reason to harm Lady Whitfield. I'm just Mr. Carver's secretary. But I overheard her in the dining car, saying she'd ruin him. She was cruel, laughing about it. I was in my compartment with Miss Castellano, reading, when the scream came. I swear it." Poirot noted the tremor in her voice, the way her eyes avoided his. "Fear, Mademoiselle Trent, is a powerful motivator. What did you fear from Lady Whitfield?" "Nothing," she whispered, her cheeks flushing. I work for Mr. Carver. His ruin would be mine too." Dr. Heinrich Vogel, his locked briefcase at his side, sat rigid, his pale face unyielding. "Lady Whitfield mocked my research, called it fraudulent in front of others at a conference last year. It was humiliating, but I am a scientist, not a murderer. I was in my compartment, asleep, as I told you. My work is my life. I had no time for her petty grudges." Poirot's eyes lingered on the briefcase. "Your work, Doctor, includes sedatives, does it not? A curious detail, given the odour in the wineglass." Vogel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. Poirot stepped back, his hands clasped behind him. "Each of you had motive, financial ruin, professional disgrace, personal betrayal. Yet the method, the locked door, the precise strike, the possible sedative, suggests a mind both cunning and meticulous. We shall test your alibis against the evidence." Hastings, leaning toward Poirot, whispered, "They all had reason to hate her, Poirot. But that locked door, it's impossible. No one could get in and out without a key, and Renaud swears his was secure." "Nothing is impossible, Hastings," Poirot replied, his voice low but resolute. "The door is but a detail. The mind behind the crime is what we must uncover." As the passengers dispersed, Poirot conferred with Inspector Lefebvre, who had received preliminary reports from the police. The dagger, confirmed as Lady Whitfield's, bore no fingerprints other than her own, suggesting the killer had worn gloves or wiped it clean. The scratches on the lock were being analysed, but they were faint, requiring a skilled hand to create without damaging the mechanism. The pearl earring, still unmatched, was a point of intrigue. Its owner remained unidentified, though Poirot suspected it belonged to Miss Castellano, whose jewellery collection he had yet to fully examine. Poirot requested a private moment with Monsieur Renaud, the conductor, to revisit the matter of the master key. Renaud, his uniform slightly rumpled from the strain of the day, reiterated his story. "I left the key in the conductor's office for 10 minutes, perhaps less, while assisting a passenger in second class. The office was locked, but I cannot guarantee no one entered. The engineer, Monsieur Dupont, has the only other key, and he was in the engine room all evening." Poirot's eyes gleamed. 10 minutes, Monsieur Renaud, is a lifetime for one with purpose. We must consider who passed through the corridor during that time. Returning to the lounge car, Poirot observed the passengers from a distance, their interactions revealing subtle tensions. Carver, pacing, muttered to Miss Trent, who nodded meekly, her eyes downcast. Dubois sat alone, his fingers tracing the edge of his glass, his thoughts impenetrable. Miss Castellano, speaking softly with a steward, seemed to regain her composure, her laughter subdued but present. Vogel, isolated, clutched his briefcase as though it were a shield. As evening approached, Poirot and Hastings retired to their compartment to review the clues. The crumpled note, with its accusation of betrayal, suggested a personal motive, yet its placement seemed staged. The pearl earring, a deliberate plant or an accidental loss, pointed to someone with access to another's belongings. The scratched lock hinted at a duplicate key, and the wine-glass residue, if confirmed as a sedative, indicated premeditation. "Hastings," Poirot said, leaning back in his seat, "we are dealing with a murderer who thinks several steps ahead. The locked door is not a barrier, but a challenge, designed to confound. We must look beyond the obvious, to the psychology of the crime." Hastings shook his head, exasperated. "But who, Poirot? Carver's got the temper. Dubois is secretive. Miss Castellano's got that script. Miss Trent's scared out of her wits. And Vogel's got those chemicals. Any of them could have done it, but none of them could have gotten into a bolted room." "The room, mon ami, is not the mystery," Poirot said, tapping his temple. "It is the intention behind the room. Someone created this puzzle, and in doing so, they have left traces of their mind. We shall find them." As night fell over the stationary train, Poirot's thoughts turned to the laboratory results, which he expected imminently. The clues, the note, the earring, the lock, the wine glass, were fragments of a larger truth, and he was determined to assemble them before the Riviera Express resumed its journey. The murderer, he knew, was watching, waiting for a misstep. But Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, was not one to falter. Chapter 6. The Second Discovery. The Riviera Express, still halted at the rustic station near Dijon, seemed to pulse with a quiet tension, its luxurious carriages a stark contrast to the grim investigation unfolding within. The evening sky, bruised with clouds, cast a sombre light through the lounge car's windows, where Hercule Poirot sat, his hands folded neatly over his waistcoat, his grey eyes reflecting the flicker of the chandelier above. Captain Hastings, pacing the length of the car, was visibly restless, his usual composure frayed by the mounting complexity of the case. Inspector Lefebvre had just departed to confer with his officers, leaving Poirot and Hastings to review the day's developments in relative privacy. The laboratory results from the wineglass residue were expected at any moment, but Poirot's mind was already at work, sifting through the clues accumulated thus far. The crumpled note accusing Lady Whitfield of betrayal, the pearl earring that did not belong to her, the faint scratches on the suite's lock, and the chemical odour that lingered in the broken glass. Each was a piece of a puzzle, but Poirot sensed that a new revelation was imminent, one that would shift the investigation's course. As the steward cleared away the remnants of a light supper, Poirot's attention turned to a discrepancy he had noted earlier in the dining car's inventory. During a conversation with the head steward, Monsieur Laurent, Poirot had requested a detailed list of provisions served the previous night. Laurent, a meticulous man with a penchant for order, had provided the list promptly, but one item stood out: a bottle of Chateau Margaux 1910, a rare vintage requested exclusively by Lady Whitfield for her private dinner in her suite. According to Laurent, the bottle had been delivered at 9 p.m., yet it was missing from the suite when Poirot examined the scene. "C'est curieux," Poirot murmured, his fingers tapping the armrest. "A bottle of such value does not vanish without purpose. We must ascertain its fate." Hastings, pausing mid-stride, frowned. "A missing bottle. Surely it's just an oversight, Poirot. The steward might have miscounted." "Non, mon ami," Poirot replied, his voice firm. "In a matter of murder, there are no oversights, only intentions. This bottle may hold the key to the method of the crime." Poirot summoned Laurent, who confirmed that only one bottle of Chateau Margaux had been aboard, reserved for Lady Whitfield at her request. "She was particular about her wine," Laurent said, his tone respectful but tinged with unease. "I delivered it myself, unopened, to her suite. The cork was intact and the seal unbroken. And yet," Poirot said, "it is not there now. Tell me, Monsieur Laurent, did anyone else inquire about this vintage?" Laurent hesitated, then nodded. "Monsieur Dubois asked if we had another bottle of the same vintage after dinner. I told him it was the only one, reserved for Lady Whitfield. He seemed disappointed." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Merci, monsieur. That is most illuminating." Returning to Lady Whitfield's suite with Hastings and Inspector Lefebvre, who had rejoined them, Poirot re-examined the broken wine glass. The fragments, carefully preserved by the police, lay on a tray, their edges glinting in the lamplight. The chemical odour, though fainter now, was still detectable. Poirot leaned closer, his nose wrinkling slightly. "This is not merely wine," he said. "There is a substance here, one that dulled the senses of Lady Whitfield, ensuring she could not resist her attacker." As if on cue, an officer arrived with the laboratory report, delivered from Dijon's forensic department. Inspector Lefebvre scanned the document, his expression tightening. "Monsieur Poirot, you were correct. The residue contains traces of chloral hydrate, a sedative. Not enough to kill, but sufficient to induce drowsiness or disorientation within minutes." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. This explains the absence of struggle, the precision of the dagger's strike. Lady Whitfield was incapacitated before the murder. The question now is, how was the sedative administered? Hastings, his eyes wide, interjected. "The wine, Poirot. It must have been in the wine. But how could someone tamper with it if Laurent delivered it unopened?" "A question we shall answer," Poirot said, turning to the suite's small writing desk. He examined the surface again, noting a faint ring where a bottle might have rested. The bottle was here, opened, and then removed. The murderer took it to conceal the evidence of tampering. With Lefebvre's permission, Poirot confronted Monsieur Dubois in his suite, the financier's lean frame tense as he stood by the window. "Monsieur Dubois," Poirot began, his tone courteous but unyielding, "you inquired about a bottle of Chateau Margaux last night, did you not?" Dubois' eyes flickered, but he maintained his composure. "I did. I enjoy fine wine, and I was curious. Laurent told me it was reserved for Lady Whitfield. I let the matter drop." "And yet," Poirot pressed, "you wish to speak with her, non? About matters you described as private, matters she threatened to expose." Dubois' fingers twitched, a nervous gesture Poirot noted. "I intended to reason with her, yes. She had information that could damage my reputation. But I never saw her after dinner. I returned to my suite and stayed there." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "We shall verify, monsieur. The truth has a way of revealing itself. Leaving Dubois, Poirot and Hastings returned to the lounge car, where the other passengers were gathered under police supervision. Poirot's mind turned to the logistics of the crime. The sedative, chloral hydrate, was a substance Dr. Vogel's research papers had referenced, a detail that sharpened Poirot's focus on the chemist. The missing wine bottle suggested it had been tampered with before delivery, possibly during the brief window when Renault's master key was unattended. The pearl earring, still unmatched, pointed to a deliberate attempt to mislead, perhaps implicating Miss Castellano. Poirot requested a private interview with Miss Castellano, whose composure had begun to fray. In her double compartment, shared with Miss Trent, she sat rigidly, her emerald green gown replaced by a simpler day dress. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, holding up the pearl earring, "this was found in Lady Whitfield's shawl. Is it yours?" Her eyes widened, and she touched her ear instinctively. I have a pair like that, yes, but I haven't worn them on this journey. They're in my jewellery case." She opened a small velvet box, revealing a single pearl earring, its mate missing. "Mon Dieu," she whispered. "How did it get there?" "A question of great importance," Poirot said, his voice gentle but probing. "Your compartment is across from Lady Whitfield's. Did you leave it unattended last night?" "Only briefly," she admitted. "I stepped out to speak with the steward about breakfast arrangements, perhaps for 5 minutes." 5 minutes, Poirot echoed, "is sufficient for one with purpose." As night deepened, Poirot and Hastings sat in their compartment, the train's stillness amplifying the weight of their discoveries. "The sedative, Hastings," Poirot said, "was in the wine, delivered to Lady Whitfield's suite. The bottle was removed to hide the tampering. The earring, taken from Miss Castellano's case, was placed to mislead. The lock scratches suggest a duplicate key. This is a crime of meticulous planning." Hastings, rubbing his temples, shook his head. "But who, Poirot? Dubois wanted that wine, Vogel's got the chemicals, and Miss Castellano's earring is in the mix. Even Miss Trent could have slipped out, and Carver's got the motive. It's a tangle." "The tangle, mon ami, will unravel," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The murderer has woven a clever web, but they have left threads dangling. The little grey cells will follow these threads to their source." As the train remained stationary, its passengers trapped in a web of suspicion, Poirot prepared for the final stages of his investigation. The laboratory's confirmation of chloral hydrate had clarified the method, but the murderer's identity remained elusive. The Riviera Express, once a symbol of luxury, was now a stage for deception, and Poirot was determined to bring the curtain down on the killer's performance. Chapter 7. The Little Grey Cells. The Riviera Express, still motionless at the small station near Dijon, seemed to hold its secrets as tightly as the passengers confined within its opulent carriages. The evening had deepened into night, the sky a velvet curtain pierced by stars, casting a faint glow through the lounge car's windows. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the car, his small, immaculate figure commanding the attention of the gathered passengers. His moustache was perfectly symmetrical, his eyes sharp with purpose, as he prepared to unravel the intricate web of deception surrounding Lady Eleanor Whitfield's murder. Captain Hastings, seated nearby, watched with a mix of admiration and apprehension, knowing that Poirot's mind was at its most formidable when the truth was near. Inspector Lefebvre, his notebook at the ready, stood by the door, his expression one of cautious anticipation. The passengers, Mr. James Carver, Monsieur Claude Dubois, Miss Sophia Castellano, Miss Laura Trent, and Dr. Heinrich Vogel, sat in tense silence, their faces reflecting a spectrum of emotions: defiance, fear, and guarded curiosity. The air was thick with the weight of suspicion, each aware that the murderer was among them, concealed by a facade of civility. Poirot, his hands clasped behind his back, began to speak, his voice clear and deliberate, carrying the authority of a man who saw beyond the surface. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, "the murder of Lady Eleanor Whitfield was a crime of precision, designed to confound. A locked suite, a jeweled dagger, a sedative in a wineglass, a planted earring, and a note of betrayal. These are the elements of a puzzle most intricate. But the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot have arranged these pieces, and the picture is now clear. The murderer is among you, and their identity shall be revealed." A murmur rippled through the group, quickly silenced as Poirot raised a hand. "Let us begin with the method. The laboratory has confirmed that the wineglass in Lady Whitfield's suite contained chloral hydrate, a sedative that rendered her helpless before the fatal blow. This was no crime of passion, but one of calculation, requiring access to her wine and knowledge of its delivery. The bottle of Chateau Margaux, reserved for her, was tampered with and removed to conceal the evidence. The door, bolted from within, bore scratches suggesting a duplicate key, crafted during the brief absence of Monsieur Renaud's master key. Poirot's gaze swept over the passengers, noting their reactions: Carver's scowl, Dubois' tightened jaw, Miss Castellano's wide eyes, Miss Trent's trembling hands, and Vogel's rigid posture. The note, "You will pay for your betrayal," suggested a personal motive, yet its placement seemed staged, a distraction. The pearl earring belonging to Mademoiselle Castellano was found in Lady Whitfield's shawl, a deliberate plant to mislead. These clues, mes amis, point to a mind both cunning and meticulous. He turned to the passengers, his voice steady. "Let us consider the motives. Monsieur Carver, your financial ruin was tied to Lady Whitfield's withdrawal from your shipping venture. A motive most compelling, but your alibi in the lounge until 11 is confirmed by the barman. Monsieur Dubois, you feared Lady Whitfield's threat to expose your financial misdeeds, and your interest in her wine raises questions. Yet you claim to have remained in your suite. Mademoiselle Castellano, your past humiliation by Lady Whitfield and the theft of your earring suggest involvement, but your presence with Mademoiselle Trent is corroborated. Mademoiselle Trent, your loyalty to Monsieur Carver placed you in fear of his ruin, yet you offer no alibi beyond your shared compartment. Dr. Vogel, your research was mocked by Lady Whitfield, and your knowledge of sedatives aligns with the crime's method, yet you insist you slept through the night." Hastings, leaning forward, whispered, "Poirot, they all fit. But the locked door, how could any of them manage it?" Poirot's smile was faint but resolute. "The door, Hastings, is not the mystery. It is the mind behind the door. Let us reconstruct the crime." He paced slowly, his words painting the scene. The murderer, knowing Lady Whitfield's habits, tampered with the Chateau Margaux before its delivery. Monsieur Laurent delivered the bottle at 9, unopened, but the seal could be broken and resealed with skill. The sedative was added, ensuring Lady Whitfield would be drowsy by midnight. The murderer then accessed Monsieur Renaud's master key during his 10-minute absence, using a tool to create a duplicate. This duplicate unlocked the suite, allowing entry. The dagger, taken from Lady Whitfield's own collection, was used to deliver a single, precise strike. The door was rebolted from within, and the key returned to its place, leaving only faint scratches as evidence. The earring, stolen from Mademoiselle Castellano's compartment during her brief absence, was placed to implicate her. The note was written to suggest a personal vendetta, further clouding the truth. Poirot paused, his eyes locking onto Dr. Heinrich Vogel, who sat rigid, his briefcase clutched tightly. "Dr. Vogel," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the silence, "you are the architect of this crime." Vogel's face paled, his lips parting in protest. This is absurd. I was in my compartment asleep. I had no access to her suite, no reason to kill her. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Non, doctor. Your research on sedatives documented in your briefcase includes chloral hydrate, the very substance in the wineglass. You had the knowledge to tamper with the wine, the skill to create a duplicate key, and the motive to silence Lady Whitfield, who threatened to expose your research as fraudulent. Your absence from the dining car provided the opportunity to prepare, and your claim of illness was a convenient excuse. Vogel's eyes darted to the other passengers, seeking support, but found only suspicion. You have no proof, he insisted. Poirot's expression was unyielding. The proof, doctor, is in the details. The scratches on the lock required a steady hand, such as that of a scientist accustomed to precision. The sedative matches your research. The earring, taken from Mademoiselle Castellano's compartment, was a clever misdirection. But you underestimated the little grey cells. You entered the suite, administered the fatal blow, and left, re-bolting the door to create the illusion of an impossible crime. Inspector Lefebvre stepped forward, his voice firm. Monsieur Poirot, these are serious accusations. Have you evidence beyond deduction? Poirot nodded. Search Dr. Vogel's compartment, Inspector. You will find a small vial hidden among his papers containing traces of chloral hydrate. It was not in his briefcase during our earlier search, but I suspect it is concealed in a false compartment or a personal item. Lefebvre signalled to an officer, who escorted Vogel to his compartment. The passengers waited in tense silence, the air heavy with anticipation. Moments later, the officer returned, holding a small glass vial, its contents glinting faintly. Found in a hollowed-out book, sir, the officer reported. It smells like the residue in the wineglass. Vogel's composure shattered, his shoulders slumping. She would have ruined me, he whispered, his voice breaking. My research, my life's work. She called it a fraud, threatened to publish it. I had no choice. Poirot's expression was sombre. You had a choice, doctor. You chose murder. Lefebvre signalled for Vogel to be restrained, and the passengers erupted into murmurs, their relief tinged with shock. Miss Castellano clutched Miss Trent's hand, tears streaming down her face. Carver swore under his breath, while Dubois stared into the distance, his face unreadable. As Vogel was led away, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice low. How did you know, Poirot? The vial, the lock, the earring. It was all so convoluted. The little grey cells, Hastings, Poirot replied, tapping his temple. They see what others overlook. The murderer's plan was clever, but no plan is perfect. The truth always leaves a trace. With the murderer identified, the Riviera Express prepared to resume its journey, the police concluding their immediate tasks. Poirot, however, remained vigilant, knowing that the final chapter of this drama was yet to unfold, as the train would soon carry its passengers and their secrets toward the sunlit coast of Nice. Chapter 8. The Confession. The Riviera Express, its gleaming carriages no longer stalled, began to move once more, the rhythmic clatter of its wheels a sombre counterpoint to the resolution of the tragedy within. The night sky over the French countryside was a tapestry of stars, their light filtering through the lounge car's windows, where the passengers sat in a subdued silence, their faces reflecting the weight of Dr. Heinrich Vogel's confession. Hercule Poirot, his small frame poised with quiet dignity, stood at the head of the room, his grey eyes calm but piercing, as if still searching for any lingering shadows of deceit. Captain Hastings, seated beside Inspector Lefebvre, leaned forward, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering disbelief at the unravelling of the case. Inspector Lefebvre, his notebook now filled with meticulous notes, had taken Dr. Vogel into custody, the chemist's wrists bound by handcuffs as he sat apart, his head bowed, the locked briefcase that had once symbolised his pride, now a silent witness to his downfall. The other passengers, Mr. James Carver, Monsieur Claude Dubois, Miss Sophia, Castellano, and Miss Laura Trent, remained in the lounge car, their earlier tension replaced by a weary acceptance, though their eyes occasionally darted toward Vogel, as if to confirm the reality of his guilt. Poirot, sensing the need to clarify the intricacies of the crime, addressed the group one final time, his voice steady and authoritative. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "the murder of Lady Eleanor Whitfield was a crime of cold precision, designed to appear impenetrable. But no crime, however clever, can withstand the scrutiny of the little grey cells. Let us review the truth, so that there may be no doubt." He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, reconstructing the events with meticulous clarity. Dr. Vogel, a man of science, faced ruin when Lady Whitfield threatened to expose his research as fraudulent, a claim that would have destroyed his career and reputation. Driven by desperation, he devised a plan to silence her, using his expertise to ensure success. On the night of the murder, he tampered with the bottle of Chateau Margaux, reserved for Lady Whitfield, adding chloral hydrate, a sedative from his own research, to render her helpless. The bottle was delivered unopened, but Vogel, with his skill, resealed it after adding the drug, a task within his capabilities as a chemist. Poirot's gaze rested briefly on Vogel, who did not meet his eyes. During Monsieur Renaud's brief absence, when the conductor's master key was left in the office, Vogel accessed it, using a fine tool to create a duplicate. This key allowed him entry to Lady Whitfield's suite at midnight, when the sedative had taken effect. He used her own jeweled dagger, a weapon both symbolic and convenient, to deliver a single, precise strike to the heart. He then rebolted the door from within, exiting with the duplicate key, leaving only faint scratches as evidence of his tampering. Turning to Miss Castellano, Poirot continued, "The pearl earring, taken from Mademoiselle Castellano's compartment during her brief absence, was placed in Lady Whitfield's shawl to mislead, suggesting a personal vendetta. The note, 'You will pay for your betrayal,' was written by Vogel in a hand not his own, a further attempt to confuse. The wine bottle was removed to conceal the sedative's presence, and the broken glass, with its telltale residue, was left as an oversight, a mistake that betrayed him." Vogel, his voice hoarse, interrupted, his eyes glistening with a mix of defiance and despair. "She left me no choice," he said, his German accent thick with emotion. "My research was my life, my legacy. Lady Whitfield laughed at it, called it worthless. She had letters, documents. She would have published them, ruined me. I acted to protect my work, my future." Poirot's expression was stern, but not without pity. "Dr. Vogel, you chose to protect your pride with murder. The little grey cells saw through your plan, for no detail escapes their notice. The vial of chloral hydrate, hidden in your compartment, confirmed your guilt. The scratches on the lock, the earring, the note, all were threads leading to you." Inspector Lefebvre nodded, his voice formal. "Dr. Vogel, you will be taken to Dijon for further questioning and trial. The evidence is irrefutable." As the police prepared to escort Vogel from the train at the next station, the other passengers began to speak, their voices low but urgent. Carver, his bluster subdued, muttered, "I thought it was me she'd drive to ruin. Never imagined it had come to this." Dubois, his face impassive, said nothing, though his fingers no longer twitched with nervous energy. Miss Castellano, tears streaming down her cheeks, clutched Miss Trent's hand, whispering, "I thought my past had caught up with me. Thank God it's over." Miss Trent, her timidity giving way to quiet relief, nodded silently. Hastings, turning to Poirot as the passengers dispersed, shook his head in wonder. "It was like a locked-room puzzle in one of those detective stories, Poirot. The duplicate key, the sedative, the earring. How did you piece it all together?" Poirot's smile was modest but triumphant. The little grey cells, mon ami, see the connections where others see only chaos. The murderer's plan was clever, but it relied on deception, and deception always leaves a trace. The odour in the wineglass, the scratches on the lock, the misplaced earring, these were the traces that led to Dr. Vogel. As the Riviera Express resumed its journey toward Nice, the first light of dawn touched the horizon, casting a golden glow over the rolling hills. The passengers, though shaken, began to reclaim their routines, their conversations turning to the mundane as the train carried them toward the sunlit coast. Poirot, standing by the window of his compartment, watched the landscape unfold, his mind at ease now that justice had been served. "Hastings," he said softly, "the Riviera Express is a microcosm of life, elegance and ambition, beauty and betrayal. But always the truth prevails, for it cannot be hidden from those who seek it with clarity." Hastings, settling into his seat with a newspaper, chuckled. "You make it sound so simple, Poirot, but I'll never look at a locked door the same way again." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Nor should you, mon ami, for in every locked door there is a story waiting to be unlocked." With the mystery solved, the Riviera Express sped toward its destination, its passengers carrying lighter burdens, save for one man whose ambition had led to ruin. Hercule Poirot, his work complete, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, knowing that the little grey cells had once again triumphed over the darkness of human intent.